L'chaim. All of you maybe know that there's a professor called Professor Yirmiyah Branover, something in Australia. Became about Shubha in Russia and eventually went to see the Rebbe. So before he went to see the Rebbe, so all the people who he dealt with, there was a chap by the name of Bar Kandavtzach and others, described to him what the Rebbe is. Tzaddik, as a Kohen, as a Manig. And they tried to impress upon him what a great individual, what a personality. And he, of course, was a Russian secularist all his life. And you hear stories. Of course, coming from a very, very secular and very atheistic background, to change completely is not very easy. So he thought Taka the Rebbe is a very big person. But you know, these Chassidim like to embellish and add on the whole business. So maybe it's a nice fella, a nice person, but you know, and he arrived in America. And eventually was Zoichet to go into Yechidus. And when he came out to Yechidus, he met Rebbe Tzvi Shem Tov Olav HaSholem. And he said that in his lifetime he never realized that such an individual can exist. And what we as Chassidim have to do is thank HaKadosh Baruch Hu that he gave us this individual. That was his way of looking at the Rebbe. And this was a person who, of course, did not appreciate the Rebbe's goynes, did not appreciate the Rebbe's tzidkes, because he had just come, was about Shuvah for a year or two. We who were Zoiche for so many decades and so many dozens and dozens of years, to see the Rebbe day in and day out. When you speak to Chevron and Lubavitch, how many times were you able to see the Rebbe Rashab Nishmasei? The Bochum didn't go to Dav Mincha every day. The Bochum didn't go to Dav Ma'ariv every day. The Bochum weren't allowed to Dav Shachos every day with the Rabbeim. Whoever saw the Rebbe Rashab? I learned the Kfar Chabad. So Shlomo Chaim used to tell us, when did we see the Rebbe Rashab? Maimer Friday night, you saw the Rebbe Rashab, and that was it. When they used to go out, when they knew the Rebbe was going in Lubavitch to walk somewhere from one place to the next, it was like, who would ever go and try to put himself and the Rebbe should see him? Maybe for Mayim Shalonu, the famous story, they used to go into the water, etc., but who was able to see? Now, one certain Peretz Mochkin on Hashem, nowadays, when we were in 770, so everything you did, you wrote into the Rebbe, and you got an answer. People wanted to go to camp, they wanted to go to Yeshiva, they wanted to do this, they wanted to... I once heard one of the advantages of marrying a groaner is that labels when I'm maskir, so you used to hear nice stories from him, Keseder. So label once told me, on my side, I don't remember exactly what Yom Tov it was, this time it was either Erev Shavuos, and possibly maybe Erev Pesach. So label walked into the Rebbe with a sack of tzetlach, with letters, and he walked in and he put it down on the table. And he wasn't expecting any reaction. So the Rebbe looks at him and says, "Was bin ich anders wie a poshete Yidin?" Why am I any different than a simple Jewish woman? By me as Echer of Yontiv. Was bin ich anders? Of course, if the Rebbe says that to you, what are you supposed to go into a discussion? What are you going to tell him? If it's Manig Yisov, is the Meshach Rabbein. What are you going to argue with the man? The label stands there via Yold. He had nothing to say, wasn't going to say anything. And he walks out. He thinks to himself, look, he left the Rebbe a pile, we should take about 5-6 hours, and people just have to wait. By the end of the day, label told me there wasn't a single settle which was not answered. Every single one of those settlers, which were hundreds, were answered. Lav Dafka, there was Shailis, there was a very silly, many people used to write in, the car is red, the car is blue, Azakar, what should I do, what should I serve for the menu? People used to write in, but not every settler we wrote in was, world shattering that you had to have the Nasi Adot, but I think you had the Metzias. And the Rebbe took time out for every single person, for every individual, in whatever phase it was, to actually answer. Chotshafir, the Rebbe had to take off of his time, and take off of his eating, and his sleeping, and his learning, and all the things that he had to do, and Afaf became, the Rebbe did it. I'm reminded of a story which, in fact, also has been labeled a Moiridik story, which is mind-boggling. Label is sitting in the office, and he gets a call from South America, from a country in South America. and there's a gentleman on the phone, and he tells the following story. His wife has to have a baby, has to have a child, and all of a sudden complications got mixed up. The doctor came out and said, listen, the way it's going now, we'll have to kill the baby to save your wife, otherwise forget about your wife. You should have said that. And this guy, he's 25, 26, then he was completely, wasn't a very frumer guy, and he don't vein it. In the same hospital, there was another Eid. And he sees Eid veint, clocked and veint. He goes over to him and asks him, can I help you out? So he tells him the Maisa that the doctor just came out and says, well, I got to make a decision. Either your wife, the baby, it's within 10 minutes, it's got complications with this, with that. And he doesn't know what to do. His Pasha's stuck. She says to the guy, he says, wait, Mr. Doctor, he's at Tzaddik in New York. I'll call up and I'll ask him. The guy basically from Tzaddikim, a from Garnish. The guy helps him out. They go over to the telephone, put whatever they put in the telephone, and they call up, and label answers the phone, and they tell him the story. The doctor does it at Meissen, they want an answer, the doctors want an answer right away. And the Vesish was done, so Label says, call me back in a half an hour. I'll go into there, we'll ask him. By this time already, the woman had already gone into a coma, and the doctors told the guy, listen, if you're not going to give us an answer 1, 2, 3, he said, Victor and Fitz, you'll lose both. You got an answer right away. So half an hour later, he calls up, and the Rebbe doesn't say anything. The Rebbe says to the guy who called, that she should accept upon himself Taras HaMishpach. So the husband says, she's in a coma. What is she going to, I can't talk to her now. So by that time, her sister arrived in the hospital. And the sister said, I'll make sure that everything the tzaddik says, I'll take care of it. I'll take care of it. I'll force it. There's no question. Whatever the Red tzaddik says, I'm going to do. 3-4 months later, a tall fellow walks in, the 770, dark complexion, very South American complexion. And he walks into the office, and he comes in, he sees over there, Klein or Label or whoever, the Simpson, and he says, I'd like to visit Rabbi Schneers. They said to him, are you Jewish? No, I couldn't. No, I'm not Jewish at all. He says, what's your shaykhus? Why do you want to see the rabbi? He says, I'm a doctor, I'm a gynecologist. And I come from this country in South America. And I'd like to visit the person who can sit thousands of miles away and can tell me what to... I forgot. I guess not. After they called back to Rebbe that the sister accepted upon herself that she's going to be made. Keep Taras HaMishpacha, the Rebbe said they should tell a doctor she should deliver the baby. Don't speak in kashas, deliver the baby, and the Rebbe said, also Zayn is Dav Tzazan. Because I like to meet a person who's sitting thousands of miles away. Doesn't know the woman, doesn't know the medical situation, doesn't know the doctors, knows absolutely nothing. And just says it. And you know what happens? It says, the baby was born gesund today. And the mother born gesund today, still survived. Everything else says, where do you have such a person? You never been as a Maisa. And this is one Maisa in thousands that we know about. And there's another story which is even a more deeper Maisa. That this I heard, Charakov, everyone knows that Charakov was very, very secretive. To such an extent that when his son became a chosn...
The doctor made the heaven?
Huh? No. Label doesn't let everybody else. It's easy. Forget this one. Whatever it is, the Charakov, everyone knows, was extremely secretive. Not only secretive, when his son became a chosn, so he knew the answer that Rebbe had given, but he hadn't, the Rebbe advised the Kala wrote it first. So when his wife called up to ask the Zun Gevana Chosn Sinisht, he said, I can't tell you yet. And that shows a bit, Yekishkai taken to an nth degree. So Charakov gets a telephone call and listens to the phone call and then puts it down. And he smiles at Label. He says, something extraordinary just happened. There was a young man, whose wife was very, very ill. And they took her to the hospital. It got worse and worse. And Friday afternoon, Mama Salit bench, maybe half an hour before, half an hour after, the doctor said to the husband, bring the ganze Mishpacha because it's a halt otot, and say goodbye to your wife, your mother. So the whole Mishpacha came. And she went Shabbos, versteht sich. And the guy is thinking to himself, bitter and finster. So he sits down by a table, and er fragt, wahrscheinlich dem Rebbe machshava pidyon. The doctor are giving up hope. And he sits down and he looks at the clock, what time it is. And I schreibt on a page, etc., etc. And he waits. 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock. 4 o'clock, the doctor comes out and says, I don't know what to tell you, but there was a major crisis. And Baruch Hashem, she's pulled out of it. You don't have to worry anymore. The Rebbe called up this younger man, or asked the Rav to call up, to tell him that at 1 o'clock in the morning, the Rebbe sat down and thought about you, and he wanted this younger man to know. The Rav didn't say why the Rebbe wanted this younger man to know, but he said that the Rebbe told him to call up this younger man, and to find out what time this guy had thought about it, and to tell him that the time that he was thinking, the Rebbe was thinking about it. Which gives us a small insight. Well, many of us saw, for example, when there's a chuppah in 7/7, the Rebbe's lights used to go out. I heard this from Label more than once. That once Label came in, and the Rebbe said, Heim bei Nacht, von 7 bis 8, I don't want to be disturbed. Well, if you have a chasana or something, the Rebbe said, Alosh nechol zayin af a chasana. The Rebbe didn't go to any chasana, didn't go to any chuppah, he was in the room. Which means, when the Rebbe, when a bocha got married or whatever it was, so we think the Rebbe sends a letter, or does he does. We don't realize the total and complete Ibergebmkeit to the Rebbe in every single facet. With the diavu of the very small maisa which happened to me. I go into Yechidus, my birthday is right before Chanukah. So I'm all excited. The day after a big Farbrengen, there was always Yechidus. After Bis Tammuz, so Gimel Tammuz was Yechidus. After Chafaf, Alef was Yechidus. It was always the night before. So I used to always go into Kislev the night after Kislev. It was Chav Kislev, I used to go into Yechidus. So about, must have been 10 months or a year before, my father had a cataract operation. So I wrote into the Rebbe, my father's having a cataract, etc., etc. There was a summer before, maybe a year before. I walk in, and I'm about to give the Rebbe the zettel. The Rebbe looks at me, was macht der Tate Zoig? I stood there, it's not a pshat, sometimes I want to play around with Ruach HaKedesh. I once heard from Arla Chitzik, a Murray Dikemaisu. One of the things that the Rebbe did was that he wanted to print all of the Tzemach Tzedek Sforim. The Rebbe was unbelievably involved in Tzemach Tzedek. The Rebbe once said that me and my wife are named after the Tzemach Tzedek and his Rebbe's. And the Rebbe once said that in all the Sforim, in all the Sikhs, it says that the Tzemach Tzedek wrote 60,000 begin. He stated in all the Sikhs and feeding Rebbe. 60,000 begin, how much is a begin? About 8 sides. That's it. No. So 60 times 8 with an accountancy. Anybody here? 60 times 8. We're talking about how much already? 400. That's thousands of pages. So the Rebbe said to Label, wenn ich habe es gehört, der erste Mal, aber gemeint sag Guzme. Und jetzt sagt, es ist kein Guzme, geschrieben mehr. Es ist nicht good, we wrote more. So the Arla Chitrik, those you know, was the one who was Masada the whole Era Torah. Torah is now 55, 60 volumes, which goes from Bereshis and goes through all the Tanakh and then the Tefillah and then Inyonim and then Gemara and my Bichla, hundreds and hundreds of Bichla. See, once asked the Rebbe, he was looking for a mimer. So he asked, who did he ask? He asked the Rebbe Fashteit. So the Rebbe wrote back, Nishnor, that the mimer is to be found in this Bichla. But before this mimer and that Bichla is a very printed narrative. So Al Chittik, when he came out and I spoke to him, he said, forget about Ruach HaKedesh. The band should remember every mimer that's printed narrative. There's a Rav, a very posh Rav, like Gordon knows. In America there's a Rav called Rav Henkin. Rabbi Gordon had a lot of shaykhs, a list of kuntres that he gave out, which he was very involved with, like Dome. And this Rav Henkin has an Einikul who's now in Etzisrol, wrote a whole Sefer HaShubas Mei Bonim. He's a Rav in Matagolan, Yena Gegend. An interesting fellow, very interesting fellow. He told me the following story. His daughter fell off the second floor of their house in Etzisrol. So Shaili, she was Ektana, she was before Bas Mitzvah, and Ma'aseh with Birus Hagemo, backwards and forwards, and Yemach, and Nishmach, and Herahim. She wrote out a whole Shuvah, And he sent Sai the Tshuva and Sai a Brocha to the Rebbe to ask for a Fuhr Shlema to talk to Zayn Gesund, etc., etc. So he gets back a letter. So he thinks to himself, there's no Ha'oris on the Tshuva. He thought the Rebbe would write 25 Ha'oris on the Tshuva. So Mistam, the Rebbe wouldn't even look at it. So he reads the letter, Masha, Pinus Kabel, Fuhr Shlema, Herahim. Then he looks on the bottom, there's a Nukta B'tzidui. Lomo Lehevi Divrei Admon Hazokim B'Siduri Al Inyan Zeh. So he said, the Rebbe, not only did the Rebbe read it, but the Rebbe saw what the guy didn't put in, and they wrote a small aura, because Alef says that Akot Nimi Shigil Achino doesn't say a Birchas HaKol. In these you can continue with thousands and thousands of stories, Belishia, Beligvu. But one of the things we saw, that everybody who was involved, that the small things that sometimes, we looked at Magid, why did they do it? The Rebbe wanted to go to the Magid to see how he did his shoelaces, or Magid wanted to go to the Baal Shem Tov, how he did his shoelaces. It was a Friday afternoon in 770, and I had a minig, Baruch Hashem, they should geholfen, that I cannot never missed a mincha Erev Shabbos. In the 5 years I was 770, can ich meyed sein. Never missed, because Erev Shabbos mincha bechlal was a very beautiful scene. First of all, there wasn't a big oilam, because everybody was running around, face what they're doing, but everybody's running around, and no one's around, mincha da b'shpet ha'erahim. And the first years I came was Tov Shechov Tes, and they would walk in about 10 minutes before Lichtbench. So if Lichtbench was 4 o'clock, they would walk in 10 minutes before. No question about it. Plain Ereglem given, and it was posh beautiful to be with the Rebbe. There was a small oil, you could see everything. It was posh beautiful. One Friday, Rav Simpson Olav Sholem, in his room, those in the back of 770, in the back there was Rav Shmuel's room. Rav Shmuel slept in 770 in a specific bed, which was known. Rabbi Gordon will tell you there was famous cockroaches in the bed, and the ants, and a very famous bed. And sometimes the Rebbe used to send Bochum to sleep with Rabbi Simpson in the same room, to Zenam, we can schlafen on Piyatzka Riesen. Those people, nowadays we wear pajamas. Rav Shmuel, I don't think even owned a pair of pajamas, but I think schlafen, that room is known for Rav Shmuel's room now. But that room had an Oren Kodesh, which had Mashiach Sefer Torah. If you think it was about Mashiach Sefer Torah. And then it stopped in the middle. So in that room, the Sefer Torah was kept in an Oren Kodesh for years. Everybody used to see, walk in, people knew it existed, but no one got very excited about it. So one year, the Oren Kodesh was already getting, it's not 30 years later, this must have been Chotes, middle of Chotes. And the Oren Kodesh was getting already a bit, so he made a new Oren Kodesh. And he asked the Rebbe that the Rebbe should take the Sefer Torah from the old Oren Kodesh and put it into the new Oren Kodesh. Because he knew the Rebbe had a Chshivas Mashiach Sefer Torah. This wasn't finished yet, but so what happened? So the Rebbe said he'll do it, but on the way to Mincha, Erev Shabbos, instead of going straight into the davening in the Bismanish upstairs, it was the end of the corridor. He'll go in and he'll live the Sefer Torah from one to the next. So 770 is you all know the different types of bachim. There were those bachim that, stay in the front line, they got to see the Rebbe do everything. So there was a window there, it was chavegeshtel. The bachim were a bit, exactly. They stood from far, they knew what was going to happen. Also wasn't a big area. And the Rebbe starts walking into the end of the corridor. But the Rebbe should help, and there's coats on the floor. No. The Rebbe went and started picking up one coat and putting it up, and a second coat to label, so you grabbed all the coats and threw them around or whatever it is. But you saw this, the Rebbe said, gang has put coats on the floor. I mean, the whole nekudah of how the Rebbe wanted, first of all, the floor should be clean, that's number one. Then a few Shabbos later, the Rebbe spoke about as a shul, those zachem was mit kenish redden wegen sehr Shabbos. Which means muktzah, cigarettes, or whatever it was. But how everything that the Rebbe did, the shleimus, I remember that Nissan used to say that the godless, that even the Rebbe's beard grows straight. That everything that the Rebbe did, the shleimus, in every single nekudah of the Rebbe's Hanhoga, and Pefrat, that Chassidim were able to see it. There was an old Eid who used to hang around called Chamyudel Shmukle, the nice kind of old man, short fella. He used to sleep downstairs by the grown-ups on 709. He used to say, the Rebbe Rashab, every night he went to sleep, people saw him go to sleep. 5 hours, 6 hours, whatever. Mit dem Rebbe, nicht der Schlaf, nicht der Rest. And you could see B'muchish, the Rebbe's Hanhoge, in every single detail. By davening you saw it, in every single nekudah. Now, if we are Siddim of the Rebbe, which basically means we're celebrating the Alef Nissan, and Ashreinu Matev Hakein, we have a shaykhus to the Rebbe, and the Rebbe told us exactly what he wants. And the Bochum used to go into Yechidus, there was Lashonis the Rebbe used to use, Kira Mitzvahs Behidur, Asmod Shkida and learning. The Rebbe wanted certain things from every chassid. He wasn't just interested in Chabad Mont, Aveda Bekeach Atzmei. Chabad, the Rebbe had in Yonim, which will remind him of the dollars and what happened by dollars. He Zachen. This one had asked a bracha for children. And you take a look at the video, and you see that he's never given a guy who hadn't had kids for 10 years, and all of a sudden Rebbe gives $1, and you look at it. So what do you see? You see the Rebbe giving $1, the guy taking it. So what's happening? He's not garnish. Absolutely nothing. You could be standing, the Shiftei Kol are standing in front of Yosef, and was at the Yosef. Yosef was standing in front of him. It was not garnish. And $1, you see the Rebbe says for Shleimer. And then you find out a week later, a month later, that this one had a kid after 10 years, that this one was ill and he went out for it, and you see it, and you don't understand what's happening at all. This guy gets $2, this guy gets $1, this guy gets $3. There's one video that the Rebbe answers 3 boys. There's a father and 3 boys, but the Rebbe answered each one differently. This one he says one thing, this one second he says second thing. Then later someone told me that they found out that each one of these 3 kids, one was a real son, one was an adopted, and one was a half a brother. They never met them before. Each one separately. Moshe Yeshua, that says Tanya, and the Rebbe demanded and wanted that we do something. I remember once a Chanukah talk, it was a Liberos Chassan, one of the Liberos Chassanas. So everybody thought it was going to be a Sikh after Chanukah. So the 4th little, the 5th little, and everyone was walking down the thing. They said, it was all game, Mitzvah Chanukah, Don't listen to why I'm the Sikh is Pesach, but you guys have got to do something. In my shul, there was a Rebbe before I came here, there was a tzoldik in Antwerpen Eid. So he came the last year and a half to shul. And I was walking home with him a few months ago, and he said, I'll tell you a story. This fellow went through a divorce. He became frei. You can't get worse. And he went to live in Africa, a diamond, he had a job. Didn't keep a thing. Absolutely, 3-4 years, garnish. Garnish. No, but after every few years, you got to buy clothing. So he comes to New York. It's a very famous store called Macy's. A store. So he goes into Macy's. As he's walking out, a 15-year-old boy goes over to him and says, "Happy Hanukkah." So he sees that he doesn't react. He says, "Sir, you Jewish?" I said, "Yeah." He says, "Today's Hanukkah?" "Yeah, no, today's Hanukkah." "You tell me, I believe you. I don't have anything to do." He said, "It's the 4th night?" "If you tell me it's the 4th night, I'll believe it's the 4th night." But he got him a naira. If I give you a naira for $1, will you take it? For $1, I'll buy it. No, I'm able to, I won't get excited about the $1. He says, "Would you light it?" He says, "Yeah, I'll come back to my hotel room and I'll light it." He takes out the $1, he gives him the $1, and then they give him the Hanukkah leaflet and the naira. He walked into his hotel room, and it ongetzun the Hanukkah lift. They told me, "I give the ganze Nacht." And that started the Moshe. I'd give any amount of money in the world to find out who that 15-year-old buffer was. The Rebbe die schickt a Boch auf Mifzoim, nicht a Boch auf Beis Yosef getan.
English.
The guy didn't know who this Bocher was and what he did and what happened in the whole exchange and what happened to him. And that's why, because the guy went on Mitzvah Chanukah and gave up the other chap a menorah, and as a result of that changed that person's complete and total life. That's one mitzvah and one Eid. The Rebbe wanted, and certainly was Matzliach, to put us on our feet. Number one, what would we be without the Rebbe? Think about for a moment, everybody sitting in this room should ask himself, without the Rebbe, where would I be today? What would I be doing? And what contribution I'd be making, not only to Klal Yisrael, but to Bechlal? And the Rebbe took every single individual. There's a beautiful story. Someone went into the Rebbe and complained. The Rebbe had one of the problems that a lot of people used to go in and complain about this one and that one, their technician, their technician, this one's not good. So the Rebbe, as everyone knows, his sense of humor was unbelievable. So he told someone, "What do you want me to do? I should take out a Sefer Yetzirah and make new people." Avram Avinu has a book. If anyone wants to create new people, I'll give you the book, very cheap. So a Sefer Yetzirah, and come out and make it a mention, make your own place. So the Rebbe said, "What should I do? I should take out a Sefer Yetzirah and make it. This is what we got, and this is what I got to work with." Many of you may have heard, suppose my Shver told you stories about, there was a guy called Rabbi Herschel Schechter. Rabbi Herschel Schechter was the first chaplain who went into, was it Telsner or Buchenwald. And he was from Rei Mahiv Mishtibel, the Babusta Rei Mahiv Mishul in the Bronx. Not the Bronx, in Brooklyn. So he tells the following story. He went to the Rebbe once. And the Rebbe said, Rabbi Schechter, I want to ask you a question. Would you have liked to have been born in the generation of Rabbi Yechim ben Zakkai? Rabbi Schechter is, on those of you who saw the video, he's now on the early years. Oh, not born, maybe he's grown since then. And, when the Rebbe asks you a question, you want to be born in Rabbi Yechim ben Zakkai years? He said, the Rebbe, he said, not a bad idea. Rabbi Yechim ben Zakkai, not his team, we come and talk him, he could have said, my shiurim, it's nice, have to go, all business, very nice. Then the Rebbe says, would you like to have been born in the generation of the Rambam? So he looks at the Rebbe, he didn't realize, where's the Rebbe going? So he looks at the Rambam, sure, meet the Rambam, picture's nice, picture, Then the Rebbe looks at him and says, would you like to have been born in the generation of the Baal Shem Tov? This guy sitting there, a very fine Jew, but he didn't have a clue of what the Rebbe was getting at. And the Rebbe looks at him and says, you know what? I wouldn't have wanted to be born. He says, if we're born in this generation, there's our simon that this is what the Almighty wants of us, and this is where we got to be, and this is what we got to do. And therefore, as a result of that, I am happy, believable, that I'm in this generation. So if the Rebbe said it about himself, so every single one of us, who had a shaykhus with the Rebbe, who has a shaykhus with the Rebbe, and the Rebbe made it clear. We have Baruch Hashem, look at the Sichronos, and you have the Yigres, and you have all the Takones, and there's nothing at all that the Rebbe didn't say that's what we have to do. Nothing. In every Indian that has to be, whether it's whether it's learning, whether it's davening, whatever it may be. We're coming up to Pesach. How much the Rebbe said on Pesach, the Haggadah, and what's going on about Pesach. There isn't anything the Rebbe didn't discuss about Pesach. And we know what we have to do. The Shaila is that the Rebbe says, when he talks about Yitzis Mitzrayim, but we have Bchira. The person has free choice. You can't force anybody to do anything. Everybody is a free agent, could do what he wants. It's a freedom. We live in a very, very free world. But if you want to have a shaykhus to the Rebbe writes, is first of all learning the Rebbe's Torah. When I came to Eretz Yisrael, there was a place called the Beis Havra. Beis Havra was like a hotel when the Bachim used to go to Bada Yeshivas, used to want them, the Bachim should get a bit of a rest, to get some fresh air and have a few good meals, because the meals that were served in Chabad were not of the highest culinary qualities, and the beds were also not of the highest qualities, and the mikvah badanish. So they wanted the Bachim should have a bit of enjoyment and pleasure. So used to have for a week, used to go, used to charge a Gonish with Gonish. So Pele She'id ran the place. He said, you know what's very strange? The Bells are given, and Baba the Kimmel, and Gerra Kimmel. All these guys come Shabbos by the table, nobody opens their mouth. The minute Lubavitch walks in, the guy doesn't stop. Whatever you guys come, there's always, I know I'll always hear something. Because we have Baruch Hashem, Ashirim, Atelfa, Kenu, Anoim, Gorlina, my mother, and the Sikhs, and everything else. More living Godush. A packet to finish to learn look at the Sikhs from top of cover to cover with all the horrors, all the Maramakim. I swear a business, it is not an easy thing, but you have to start somewhere. And it comes a day of Yibalav Nissan, where the Rebbe said, Shama came down to this world. At the end of the day, those who were Zoycher, for example, I remember to get into the Seder was, many Bachrim went home for Yom Tov. I didn't get to the Mama Tata. My parents were there in Israel, I was in America. So immediately the Rebbe came into the Seder by the Bachrim. The Rebbe used to go finish Ma'ariv and would give out some matzah. The whole Ma'ariv would give you the matzah. The Rebbe looked at the matzah and looked at you, and then he broke off pieces. So he went Baal Shemski Yonim, when you saw B'Shas Ma'ariv, and this he gave one guy a whole matzah, and he told him to the guy's guest, I give to the guest the matzah, so the guy who takes in the guest, I'm going to get my matzah. And the way they managed that matzah scene was the most unbelievable thing. And the Habahuv, I had a maisa which Poshet, I felt, there was a bacher who became a chosn, and for some strange reasons, I don't know what I went to the reasons, he went to his kala for Pesach, which was not a dumb thing, Pasha. So he asked me, when I'm passing by the Rebbe for matzah, I should ask the Rebbe for a piece of matzah for him. So he gives me the matzah, and I say, such and such guy. The Rebbe says, who is it? Who is it? And where is he? So I thought, I'm the snitcher. never smart. So never good to face it. Anyways, I never realized my predicament very, very quickly. But you saw, Shas Maita on the spot, to the second, it was like unbelievable. But the matzah, the Rebbe used to give out matzah after Ma'ariv, and then he would go across the corner of Kingston to 749. And also, I want to tell you a small story, which nowadays, you talk about millions and trillions. A few days before Pesach, there was a few bochrim, and we said as follows: Rebbe's going to come into 749. So I said, Pastor, we should have a red carpet. A melech gold. I'm going to have a red carpet. I said, I'm saying, to rent a red carpet then cost $30. Today, $30 can be scraped for a glass Wasser, can be scraped for $30. And we went around collecting 50 cents and $1 until we finally got to $30. On one hand, you've got the red carpets, they start chitzenias, they start with the jalapenias, we're not into chitzenias. So we put down the carpet, and by us was a bit shaky. We didn't want you're playing around with our Rebbe's nicht. It's a very difficult thing. But you see the Rebbe's sensitivity as the Rebbe walks down. So he walked down Kingston, crossed the street, then made the left to come to 749. And as he sees, he looks down the carpet, he gets it out. He stops with the puss, and he walks on the carpet. The simcha that we had, which is Maiseh, is undescribable. And they never walked in with about 150 buchem after. Oh, please, I want to go right to the lights. Not a problem. But whatever it is, never walked in. And Abroche was his dead silence. And Rebbe looked. He walked around. And we asked where the garbage can was. And with the lift. And then there was a paper bag. The Rebbe's eyes didn't miss a thing. And he had also Mr. Cook there, very famous cook. And Abroche, and then he gave out the kurze Broche. And Rebbe walked out. And then the Bochum made the Seder extremely quickly. I won't say how long, 1, 2, 3. So by the time the Rebbe got upstairs, half an hour later, to do the Seder, the Bochum were all there. And Rebbe held the matzahs in his hand. And Rebbe walked in, we must have been 25 Bochum the most, who saw the Seder from beginning to end. Rebbe walked in, you see the Arizal with his matzahs, how he made the Kaira, dead silence, there wasn't a sound. And then they started the Seder. There was a fellow called Yankel Katz from Chicago. He was the Chazan who said the Seder loud. And that year was the first nach Pesach Tovshech of Tes. So Yankel Katz kept saying that God. He finished, they benched. They were benched, and then they finished benching, and they made very Priyagofen, and they started saying at the end of the house, it's not God. So Yankel Katz said it quite quickly. And by the time he finished Melbourne, the Rebbe was way, way behind. I think even before Nishmas. By that time already, the Oilam started coming. I remember the Draskin, who was quite a bit high, and he was trying to push the Bochum back because the table was very, very, it wasn't such a massive table. And in the middle, that year was the Nigna Prozes Teishiv Yerushalayim. So the Rebbe, in the middle of the meal, Bechlal never, when the Bochum were there, only their Pesach, usually there was never any singing. He didn't sing. The Rebbe spoke. Rashag used to always ask every year the same exact questions. He would ask, how could the Talmidim come and, tell him, he has my Krishma, and what's about Arbe Zara, and had only one, all business. And then one year I remember, I'll never forget this, it was Rashag got up like, Rashag sat on this side, the Rebbe sat on this side, and the feeding Rebbe's place was empty, was set. All of a sudden Rashag picks himself up. And those of you who remember Rashag, when he got red, it was mamash like a tomato. It was unbelievable. Mamash roit his napsazai. And it was quite red, no question about it. And he says to the Rebbe, and the Rebbe didn't like. The Rebbe didn't want to be put on the spot, as he says in English. As B'shas Mashiach is coming, so the Rebbe be mitnem in sein karat. The Rebbe should take me together in his carriage. And he saw the Rebbe was very uncomfortable about this whole business. So the Rebbe said, as if we sitz do, on the private to say that we sitzen by Korban Pesach is over. Then he sat down. But it was a scene to behold. And then came the the meal. So all of a sudden the Rebbe started singing Prozes Teishiv Yerushalayim. And Fashteit, everybody started singing. And the place, the table, everyone knows, started moving. Just down the road. And Rashag is on the floor. And there was two Bochum very quietly, picked them up. And Richie Churgen had Gishri, those of the guy called Richie Churgen. Zichronos was a guy who was a Zocher Begero 1955, but forgot to go back. So he was 56 or 57 or 58. He was sitting the whole time. And he was there, geblieben dort. And I remember Hendel had the Hendel geschrien. These guys were flying. They were going off. And Rashag was mamish on the floor. I mean, you have to understand what this means. The Rebbe's brother-in-law is sitting on the floor by his own table. It's my table. It's sitting on the floor. And he picked up the Bacham, nicely picked him up. Not a word. Don't mean Zema says bittul. He didn't say a thing. The others were screaming and yelling and Shemet Chayla. And Rebbe started making with his hands, and all of a sudden the furniture started going. I see an unbelievable seer. And then the Rebbetzin opened the door a bit and gave a help. Because I think Zamaduch was the one time. Furniture, there wasn't the way. But it was that was the singing. Then when they got to benching, the Rebbe, the Katz finished, and the Rebbe was before Nishmas. That must have been before Nishmas. And then the Olam Chatzir, that the Rebbe is before Nishmas, so it became dead silence. What dead silence means, you could hear a fly. And for about 15 minutes, the Rebbe said the Haggadah, and the guy stood there. I mean, I've never actually taken any of these stuff that most of these guys take to get high, but the seer of that evening was marvel alarai. And then the second night, the Rebbe came downstairs to Farbrengen. That itself was something. 1:30 in the morning. First of all, you don't feel yourself in Mahader. They have a sveikas on the koisus between 4 and 5 and 6. So most of them already, when it comes to 7, you're in a different situation. The matzah with the wine and the whole smell of the whole situation was very, very interesting. And we came downstairs at 1:30. The Rebbe to get out of the Seder, that was more interesting. But the Rebbe had to go out of the Seder, so you had hundreds of people there already. By the time the Rebbe finished, Hanukkah was there. Like, everybody came. So the room wasn't a large room, and the door wasn't a large door. So the Rebbe had to wait about 5-6 minutes till everybody went down the stairs. And he held his matzah, his kaira, and he took it downstairs to his room, because the Rebbe gave out matzah to many people in the rest of the next few weeks. And the second night, he came downstairs to Farbrengen at 1:30. The Farbrengen went usually from 1:30, sometimes to 5, sometimes to 5:30. After the Farbrengen Yale with Chazer from 5:30 to 7:30. And then 8 o'clock, Farbrengen Schlafen bis halb of 9, 9:15 to 10. And the Farbrengen, the Rebbe sat with his eyes closed. So someone once asked him why the Rebbe said his eyes closed. The Rebbe said he knows that people at 3 o'clock in the morning, the second night Pesach, are fast asleep. And if he's going to look at them, they'll feel very, very uncomfortable. So he sits with his eyes closed. So Vision the Sikhs, he would open his eyes. He was singing. Some of the most beautiful Sikhs you find. And it was a himmel because he couldn't say L'chaim. The only thing he could do was sing. And the Rebbe would speak. It's a moyer diketzir. And one thing I also remember, which remains in my mind, when the Rebbe finished the Seder the first night, Tachshchav Tes, so normally the Rebbe came out of 7-7 and would go this way to the right to go home. All of a sudden the Rebbe turns the other direction and he's going towards Kingston. So of course all the Bacham, the Rebbe can't go on himself, he needs a Bacham with him. So all the Bacham start walking with the Rebbe and nobody knows where he's going. And I remember Yale Khan started coming up, his jacket was flying malazite, he didn't know that he was coming. And we started walking up Kingston, and then all of a sudden the Rebbe takes a right on Union, and still nobody knew. But where's the Rebbe going? The Rebbe used to go take his mother home years ago with that. And then the Rebbe started walking till the Kreil, and then by the Kreil the Rebbe came out. So die was am got Seichel, went home. But nicht alle home Seichel. But one thing, but yet, solche event, that people who stood right behind the Rebbe heard the Rebbe asked his wife, so she gedenkt, she remembers the Shver Seder. That's the only thing we heard. They never walked straight home. Those who saw it which is very, at the end of the day, these are memories which are eingekapt in a person's Zichronos, but the tachlis from all of this, that folgen with the Rebbe wanted of us, the takonas of the Rebbe in the Mitzrayim, to learn the Rebbe Sichos, and to realize what we have. The famous Gemara, a famous story about in Russia, they had to go to one of the prime ministers to get rid of a decree against the chinuch it was. So they took a few Rabbonim, but the Rabbonim couldn't speak a word of Polish or Russian properly, so they thought, you know what, we'll get a Psashtikl Maskil who's some type of a nice guy. He's a nice guy, so they wanted to choose a certain guy. So they asked any of the Rabbonim, should we take him? So I think it was a Chaim Brisker who said, no, we can't take him. I said, why not? She quoted the Gemara. The Gemara said that a person gives a guy a pikodin and he says it's silver. Like give you a watch. I took a silver watch. I'm going away. Watch it for me. And someone, you don't watch it properly, and it's stolen. But then you find out that the watch wasn't silver, it was gold. So how much you have to pay? Well, you have to pay silver. So he said, Yena, when it talks about chinuch, is by him silver. Ayos chinuch is gold. Only the Rebbe to have a havana, to understand what we have, and to use every single individual, the koiches that the Rebbe gives him, and the Rebbe certainly pours out koiches. We see the hatzloche, that things are happening today, that in the whole world, what's happening. We have to put in a little bit of work, Nishkensach at the end of the day, to make sure that the Rebbe's Chassidus should be moved, that his Mitzrayim should go all over the world. And if everyone will do his bit, Nishkensach. I want to say to the Rebbe, if you know Alef Beis, and the next guy only knows Alef, you still got an achrayus to teach the other guy, the extra us. And if everyone does that, then Zichronos is Galus, and Mashiach, and Zalagud is Achel Chaim. Where's the Mashkin?